You might be wondering, why did Peter and Jason choose southeast Ecuador to start the Terra Frutis and the Fruit Haven projects? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I'm going to summarize a lot of these factors for you. Basically, Jason did a lot of research looking for traveling around Ecuador, Peru, and a few other places, looking for the best area to start this kind of project. And I did some research afterwards coming down here to make sure this was the best place for me to go to. And even if you're not thinking of coming to Ecuador or this area of Ecuador specifically, it may help you to hear all these factors that we considered so that you can make a wise decision when you're deciding where to buy land and where to move to in the tropics. So there's three categories I'm going to get into: culture, environmental, and land. So the cultural factors that are relevant to this area. It has low crime. That's important. You don't want to be living in an area like, for example, some parts of Mexico where you're in fear of armed robberies, right? So the violent crime is extremely low in this area. The only thing we really have to worry about is petty theft, like if you leave a house unattended for a couple months and just nobody ever goes there and it's unlocked and there's a bunch of valuable stuff inside, well, that's stupid anywhere in the world, right? So petty theft is something, but there's no violent armed robberies in this area of Ecuador to speak of. It basically doesn't happen. It's a very nice area. Low tourism. This may not sound like a positive thing. In some ways it isn't, but low tourism usually means no crime, right? Areas like the coast of Ecuador, where there's tons and tons and tons of tourists, criminals are attracted to those areas because tourists generally tend to have more money than the local population in developing countries, right? So in this case, low tourism is kind of a plus. Um, Foreigners are welcomed here. In general, the local population are welcoming to foreigners as long as you make some effort to learn Spanish, of course. You can get residency pretty easily, and you can buy land easily as a foreigner. That's actually kind of rare in a lot of countries, like, for example, in Thailand. It's very hard or almost impossible to buy land as a foreigner. So it's a huge plus for Ecuador that foreigners can buy land here. You don't even have to have residency or anything. You can just come here for a few months per year on a tourist visa, or you don't even have to ever come here. You can buy investment properties as a foreigner with just your passport. The cost of living is very low here, as it is in many developing countries, and that's helpful. The fruit quality at the markets is generally very high. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's Southeast Asia, right? It's not Thailand. You can't find 20 different varieties of durian at every market. Um, so, but the fruits that they do have consistently at the market are generally very good and of very high quality. I can always find very high quality mangoes during mango season, high quality pitahayas, watermelons, papayas, bananas, a number of other tropical fruits. So there is a really good, much better variety here than there are in northern climates, of course, but it's also good fruit, high quality fruit. Um, there's Obviously, this is a factor that only happened once we got here, but now there are already raw vegan communities here. So you have people, like-minded people in the area. You have access to a lot of rare fruit genetics, fruit trees, and other plants that we're cultivating here, which we had to bring from other countries at a very high expense. But now that they're already here, everyone else can benefit from getting these plants from us. Access to workers and contractors for building and knowledge. And so this is a huge advantage. It's very hard to go by yourself to a foreign country and try to start a homestead or a permaculture farm by yourself. It's good to already have people who are doing the same kind of thing that you're doing in the area. Those were all the main cultural factors. So let's move on to environmental factors. There's a low incidence of parasitic diseases in this area. You don't have to worry about getting malaria or yellow fever in the area that we're in. There is a little bit of chikungunya and dengue, but those aren't really that bad, honestly. And out of hundreds of tourists that have and visitors and community members that have come through these projects in the last few years, only like 2 or 3 of them have come down with a mosquito disease like chikungunya, because mosquitoes are so rare here. And also leishmaniasis, you can't really get that in this area either. It would be very difficult to get that here. So very low incidence of some of your typical tropical parasitic diseases. The weather is very comfortable. There is a lot of rain here, but there's also a lot of sun. The temperature is in the daytime, depending on the time of year, between 24 and 32 Celsius, and in the nighttime, it'll be between 18 and 20 Celsius in the warmer season, and between 15 and 18 Celsius in the cooler season. So it's really comfortable to live here. It never really gets too cold or too hot. And also, one thing that's important is that super tropical fruits grow here. So this is a proper tropical climate. We are on the lower edge of super tropical tolerance. For example, we're not going to have as amazing of a durian crop as you will in a monsoon climate in Thailand, for example. But things will do pretty well here. So it's hot enough for super tropicals without being too hot to not really be comfortable. Let's move on to some of the land-related factors, right? The soil here is good, and this is something that we're talking specific to this part of Ecuador, because, for example, if you go and buy land on the coast, a lot of the cheap farmland there is spent. It's been farmed for years and years, and there's a lot of heavy industrial commercial farming there. So a lot of the used farmland that you're buying is full of chemicals, right? Lots of agriculture, lots of fertilizers, ammonium, aluminum, salt, things like that. The soil is laden with it. But you buy land here, it hasn't been commercially farmed quite as heavily. So yeah, they do use some chemicals here to farm, but most of the farmland you're buying still has pretty good soil. It hasn't been exhaustively farmed for the last 100 years with industrial chemicals. So that's a good thing about this area. We have noticed that soil that's been used for cow pasture for a really long time, like 50, 60 years, can get somewhat acidic, but because obviously the cows are taking calcium and magnesium out of the soil, but you can rectify this pretty easily through various permaculture methods, such as planting deep-rooted chop and dap trees, and also adding limestone, Epsom salt, various organic soil amendments to wreck that easily. And again, like I said, that's only some areas that we see that happening in. The land price is very low here. You can find land between $500 and $5,000 per hectare, usually for larger lots, depending on location and a whole other number of factors. If you need more information on that, you can send me a message. So low land price is obviously a huge plus if you go to places like Costa Rica, or even other parts of Ecuador like Vilcabamba, which is also in southeast Ecuador, but not the area that we're in. Land prices are extremely high because people have been coming there from foreign countries and buying land for a really long time. And here, land prices are still very low, and that's good. And there's tons and tons of farms for sale. You have a good choice of elevation here. So we're at 760 meters, and it's a pretty good climate. That seems really high, but we're so close to the equator, so it's nice and warm. But if you like it a little bit cooler, even right in this area, there's higher areas up in the mountains. You can buy farms 1,300 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters elevation if you like it a little bit cooler and drier. And also, this Ecuador is pretty easy and cheap to get to from the U.S., right? For most major U.S. airports, you can get a one-way ticket for like $300 and two ways for $600. Again, it depends on the time of year and where you're coming from in the U.S. and Canada, but it's pretty cheap. And the area of Ecuador we're in is 4.5 hours bus from the airport you would arrive at in Cuenca. I mean, it's not super fast, but that's pretty good. And you can usually get decently cheap flights from Europe, again, depending on where you're coming from, but people have gotten well-way flights from Europe for $300 to $400, so that's pretty good. All right, those are all the major factors I can think of. If you have any more questions, leave comments below, and I'll try to answer them. If you have any more personal or specific questions about buying land in Ecuador or why we chose this area, feel free to send me a message.